Hello, I'm Bill Martin. I'd like to welcome you to this edition of On the Banks. On the Banks is a video and podcast series where we meet brothers, hear their stories, and celebrate the shared values of Phi Gamma Delta. In January 2015, Phi Gamma Delta announced a partnership with Donate Life to increase the number of organ donors across North America in a joint venture called the Immortal Phi Gam Project. Since that time, many brothers have added their names to the organ donor registry, and many chapters have conducted organ donor drives on their campuses. One brother who has played an essential and even inspirational role in this project is Ed Gullowitz, TCU, class of 1989. We're going to hear Ed's remarkable story today. Ed, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Bill. It's nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Now, you're from St. Louis, correct?
That's correct.
And I'm from St. Louis, which since 2003 has been the home of the annual Fiji Leadership Academy. As indicated by the fact that we've been there every year since 2003, it's worked pretty well as a central location and as a host city. But with the Academy always being on the first weekend of January, the weather can sometimes be a problem. I especially remember the 2014 Academy. As brothers were arriving on Friday, the weather forecast was for a strong winter storm starting later on Saturday.
Yeah, and I admit that that's also an important weekend time frame for me. At that time, I was at home by myself, except for the 4 pets that we have, the 2 dogs and the 2 cats. I was watching a hockey game on TV, and I was the only one there. My wife was on the other side of the city area, and she was participating in a family gathering for late Christmas and a birthday party with her family. I wasn't able to attend because I was at home. I had supplemental oxygen. I was very sick. I had been sick for a number of years, and basically it would have been very difficult for me to go spend that time with the family, with the kids that would have been there, our nieces and nephews, fear of infection and things like that. And I was basically struggling to breathe at that point. I had been on supplemental oxygen for 2 years, and I was waiting to receive a double lung transplant. And that is not a guaranteed thing to have happen. But if you're lucky enough to get the call to have a double lung transplant, you have to be ready in many different ways. And that night we were anticipating snow and ice, and I was just thinking to myself, this would be a very inconvenient night if that phone call ever did come. But yeah, that just kind of gives you an idea of what I was going through that night. And I did not even know that Fiji Academy was occurring in St. Louis at that time.
Right. Well, and back at the Union Station Hotel in St. Louis, the site of the Academy, all the Fiji Academy participants were planning their escape from St. Louis by Saturday morning. We had been informed that the airport was closing Saturday night in advance of the storm. Flights were being canceled into the coming week, and there was a good chance or the potential for the storm even to disrupt highway travel as well. So that was the concern on the minds of the brothers visiting in St. Louis at that time.
Yeah, it was an evening that I knew potentially could be bad for the weather, and there was this odd feeling that I felt that something very fortuitous was going to occur that night, if any night, because it seemed the most inconvenient. And I was telling my wife at the time, asking her how things were going, and also noting that the weather had not changed yet, so we were happy about that. She would have been about 30 or 45 minutes away to get back home, and I was just basically hoping that if something happened or I needed her, that we wouldn't have any problems. But so far so good was where we were at.
Yes. And by late Saturday evening, with the Fiji Academy, many of the Academy attendees had already left St. Louis trying to get out ahead of the storm.
Right. And what happened at that point for me was I had gotten a phone call from a nurse coordinator at Barnes Jewish Hospital in St. Louis, which is part of Washington University School of Medicine. I had never spoken to this particular nurse coordinator before, and just about an hour before, I thought, wow, this would be kind of an odd time to get the call. But of course, you do want to get the call no matter what the circumstances. And I remember Stacy introduced herself, says, Ed, this is Stacy, lung transplant coordinator here at Barnes. We believe we have a pair of lungs that will work for you, and we need you to come down to the hospital as soon as you can. I was prepared for the fact that, what I needed to do, but it's still a complete shock. It's a complete bolt of energy that goes through you, adrenaline, to know that this night could actually change your life. And I basically was kind of dumbfounded by the call. I'm on supplemental oxygen. My cognitive abilities are probably lower at that point because oxygen deprivation doesn't make it easy for you to always understand everything or keep everything clear. And I remember trying to clarify everything. And I said, well, I want you to talk to my wife. And I gave her the contact info, and a few minutes later we hung up, and then she contacted my wife, Anita, and they had a conversation. And then Anita called me back about 5 minutes later and said, basically, why did you have her call? And I said, well, because I was concerned that I was confused and I had the information incorrect. And she kind of mildly said something like, well, we're already on our way. We've got everything under control. You didn't need to have her call. We're on top of it. So basically that started a whole series of events. It's kind of like an expectant mother and having, the baby coming. We had already packed our bags. We had a plan to get down to the hospital. And basically her mom and her headed over in separate cars. We had a strategy to take care of the pets. We also had the bags ready to go. And basically by about 8:30, 9 o'clock, we were in the car in the evening, headed down to Barnes. There still was no weather that had come in that was bad. And we drove down to the hospital, which is about 25 miles away, got checked in about 10 o'clock, got admitted into the room about 10:30. And at that point, it's a little bit of wait and see. First of all, the lungs have to get there. They have to be finally approved. And you're kind of in a wait and see mode. And it's very anxious. You're very nervous. You're kind of worried about, is this going to happen? Is it not going to happen? Will the lungs be good? Will they not be good? All kinds of questions enter your mind. And eventually my mother-in-law and Anita were all there. And we were just waiting for the word that things were a go. And about 3 a.m. in the morning, by that time they'd already prepped me with an IV. I don't remember if I'd received any sedative whatsoever. They probably gave me a little bit because I'm a talkative guy. They probably wanted to keep me a little quiet probably at times. And basically they had determined that they felt that the lungs were an excellent match and that I had a good chance with them. So at 3 a.m. in the morning which would have been January the 5th, because January the 4th was, the day before, they basically had me on a gurney, and they took me down to the operating room.
So
And
this is Sunday morning.
this would be Sunday
So,
morning,
so this is 3
3
a.m. on Sunday morning. And,
correct.
there's so much about your story that's incredibly moving, but the one part stands out to me, and that is your reaction as you have heard you tell it before, as you were rolled into the operating room, your reaction to seeing all these people in there who were there to perform this life-saving surgery, to participate in that. So what did you see? What impression did it make? What was it that went through your mind at that point?
Well, like I said, I might have had a mild sedative already in me. I'm not sure, but I was fully aware when I was of my surroundings. When I went in on the gurney, they wheel you in, and they go into a large operating room, and I remember kind of glancing around, and I'd see 3 people over to the right, and then another section. There'd be 4 people around a station or a machine, another 5 or 6 at another location, and 4 or 5 over here. To me, it looked like 30 or 40 people. And I was really taken back to think that, well, they're here just for me. They're here, the doctors, the nurses, the technicians, the anesthesiologists, they're here for one person at this moment, and that was me. And it was a very humbling, almost incredible feeling that so many things were coming together at that moment to try and do 2 things. One, save my life with a double lung transplant, but also to honor the request of the donor, or the donor's family, to make it possible for the gift of organ donation to save another person's life. So it was a very humbling, nervous, and exciting moment. And I knew I was in a wonderful facility. I had some of the best doctors in the world. The actual surgeon that was going to be performing the surgery, I had actually met earlier, a month or 2 earlier, to discuss the surgery. And he is a world-renowned pioneer in lung transplant. His name is Dr. Patterson, Dr. Alec Patterson. Now, you never know who you're going to get as your surgeon or your chief surgeon when you go in, depending on timing. But it turned out that he was the one. And I didn't know that at that moment. And he is one of the 5 surgeons that pioneered lung transplants at Toronto General Hospital years earlier in 1983 with the first successful lung transplants. So it's, once again, I'm in the middle of all kinds of great things happening around me, for me, and because of other reasons. And I was completely at peace with the moment, in the sense that I knew I had put myself in the right place by saying, yes, I'd go through these processes to be prepared for this and to be willing to accept these lungs, and to go through the uncertainty and the difficulty and the pain that you'd have to go through, but also the chance at a renewed and refreshed life. So I felt that I was in the right place at the right time, and it was not just me. It was so many other people that were pouring their faith in something bigger than themselves, that they were doing something for me. And it was an overwhelming and wonderful moment in my life before they actually decided to shut me up and make me.
So how long did this, this is probably the most invasive surgery you can have. How long did the surgery take?
Well, I did preface this with the fact that Dr. Patterson was my surgeon. And when we met with him earlier, months earlier, he had explained that the surgery would probably take 8 to 8.5 hours for me. I had a collapsed lung 2 years prior to this, and to repair that collapsed lung, they put an adhesive on the outside of your lung to adhere to the chest wall. They call it a talc or talcum, and it's like a glue. And he explained that it would take a little longer to take that glue off of the, which was the worst lung, of the two, and that would take and add time to the procedure. And I think that he made the estimate of 8.5 hours based on if there was another surgeon beside himself doing the surgery. After the surgery was completed, and when I learned how long it basically took 4.5 hours.
Mm.
So here I have a life-saving double lung transplant that took place in 4.5 hours.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know,
Half the usual time. Right.
and actually, when they first started doing them, they were doing heart and lungs together because they didn't know they could do it any other way. And sometimes those transplant surgeries could go 12,
Mm.
you know, yeah, even up to 18 hours in the very beginning.
Right.
And to get down to 4.5 hours, I'm thinking, well, I either was an easy patient or they were just absolute pros at this.
So after the surgery, this incredibly invasive surgery, at what point, how long was it, or at what point did you begin to feel the effects of that you had new lungs? How long did it take before you could really tell?
It didn't take long, Bill. When you have a surgery like this, basically you're on some type of life support as you're going through this, so to speak. I couldn't give you all the different terminology. I would mess it all up, but you're on different machines that are keeping you alive during the surgery. So they're keeping you oxygenated, and your blood is oxygenated to keep you alive. And when they have the new lungs in you, they have to determine if things are going to be stable enough to close you back up. And luckily enough for me, they were able to do that. So initially, it looked like the surgery had been done with good results. I remember my wife explaining that the ICU nurse or the intensive care nurses were coming out and updating her, and they said, your husband's doing great. And she asked the question, well, how do you know? And they said, well, we do this all the time, and he's doing great. For example, his skin is pink.
Mm.
And prior to this, my skin was gray because of the lack of oxygen. So, you have like a pallor about you with the lack of oxygen. And immediately after the lungs were in, my lungs were producing oxygen for my body and my blood. So I was already pink before I even knew it.
Yes.
The other thing is that the lungs were responding very well, and they were able to take me off of sedation. And when they do that, they take the breathing tube out of you, which is in your lungs. And I remember them waking me up from that, asking me to cough as they remove the breathing tube. And then you're very groggy at that point. You're coming out of sedation. I was very confused by what was going on. I kept looking at an analog clock, and I couldn't figure out what in the heck it was saying. I didn't know how many times or how long I was out. Kept asking the same question. Because you're under this anesthesia, you don't have a memory, so to speak, right at that point. And basically, I was doing better. I was in a lot of discomfort. They had me under pain medication, but I was all right. And to get that breathing tube out, because that's something you always are concerned about. And they basically, I went through that first day. Didn't do much, but I was doing all right. And the next day, I remember the surgeons coming in. They basically at 4 a.m. they do your X-rays in the room in the ICU. At 6 a.m. the surgeons come in. There's a team of surgeons, and Dr. Patterson is one of them. And then your pulmonologists come in about 8 o'clock when it's breakfast time, which you're not eating anything at that point, basically. And that first day after the anesthetic was out, I definitely felt different. I felt like, there was something changing in my body, and I had these massive lungs. It felt like in my chest. You could feel every breath.
Right.
The one thing that you were not wanting to do is sneeze, because that would cause such a trauma to you. That would be like, ah. But later that day, I could move better. I could do different things, and I had more awareness. And I think it was that second day when the doctors came in at 8 a.m. in the morning, the pulmonologist, and they had discussed the idea that with the nasal cannula that you wear for your supplemental oxygen, it was time for me to start practicing not using the supplemental oxygen. That's 8 a.m. And having been on supplemental oxygen for 2 years, I'm like almost every other lung patient that's has chronic lung failure. You are paranoid without your nasal cannula and the oxygen because it's providing you life. And I probably pulled it out once or twice, a few times during the day, just to say I did it, but I wasn't about to take it off.
Mm-hmm.
And at 5 p.m., which was dinner time, I think they like to interrupt meals, so that's always fun. And I was probably just drinking juice or something, who knows. I was still on IV. And the pulmonologists come in and they go, well, how's your breathing without the nasal cannula doing? And I said, well, I guess all right. And they say, why don't you try it again? So I take it off, and I'm about 20 or 30 seconds into it, and I put it back on. They go, well, that's good, but you need to do more. But we do want to tell you that at 8 a.m., we turned your oxygen off. And
so you had gone all day. You had gone all that day.
That's right. And my numbers, I could see all the numbers on the monitors were perfect.
Yeah.
And
wow.
They said, your new lungs are doing the work. You don't need the cannula anymore. You don't need the supplemental oxygen.
Right.
And to me, that was the most overwhelming sign that I had crossed a divide. And
yes.
it was an amazing thought that I might be able to resume life without having a nasal cannula, and the fear that if something failed with that I might have some very bad time.
The moment that you had been hoping for many, many years.
It's a very overwhelming sense that your life was so different for so long, and then all of a sudden it could be different almost immediately once again. It's very overwhelming.
Yes. Now, so fast forward a year from around that time to the Fiji Academy in 2015. Glenn Moore, who is a Texas Tech graduate and a former Archon, is announcing the Immortal FIGAM project, the fraternity's new partnership with the organization Donate Life to promote organ donation. But Ed, you are not aware of this, or you're not even aware that the Fiji Academy is happening in your hometown. I mean, how would you know, right?
Right. And basically, I've lived in St. Louis since I graduated. I was at TCU in Fort Worth as a Fiji at the Tau Chi chapter. I transferred from TCU to Washington University in St. Louis, which is part of the same university as Washington University School of Medicine, which is where my doctors and my physicians and surgeons came from for my transplant, and still treat me to this day. And I basically hadn't been in touch with the fraternity. We didn't have a chapter up in St. Louis. I had been in touch with my fraternity brothers, still very close to them. But, I was I didn't think there was any part of Phi Gamma Delta other than my personal fraternity brothers. I didn't really quite see how it was going to affect me.
Right. Until, if I may, if I may, and I'm going to take a sidetrack here because the name of this whole podcast series is On the Banks, harking back to a chance meeting of two Phi Gamma Delta brothers in 1849, John Templeton McCarty and Bolivar Krebs, two of maybe 25 members of Phi Gamma Delta at the time. They meet on the banks of the Sweetwater River up in Wyoming. Now, the Sweetwater River ultimately drains into I think the North Platte. Ultimately, its water feeds into the Mississippi River. So here in St. Louis in 2016, on the banks of the Mississippi, we've got another Fiji Academy about to happen that January. It's approaching, and you get a call.
Yeah, well, it actually was an email, but it's basically call, email, whatever way they decide to notify you. But I had been volunteering with Mid America Transplant, and Mid America Transplant's the local organ procurement organization. There's 58 in the U.S. They're a nonprofit organization that's in charge, so to speak, of the recovery of organs and tissue from donors, and they also coordinate with the hospitals and the transplant centers. So I had been volunteering with them for about half of a year, and I had received information that there was this donor outreach campaign going on. And I'm reading the email, I'm reading more about it, and it says, Union Station, Phi Gamma Delta, Immortal Phi Gamma, and I'm reading it, and I'm like, wait a minute, well, where's this coming from? Is this really from Phi Gamma Delta, or is it from the Mid America Transplant? It was two things that were very significant, important to me, were coming together right in front of me, and I couldn't email fast enough to say, hey, I'll do this. I am a fraternity brother. This is very significant to me. Please
Well,
let me.
they were looking for a volunteer, a representative to go to what you found out was the Fiji Academy, in
Yes,
order to continue to help promote the Immortal Phi Gam project.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
so that a little bit later, the event occurs, and I remember walking into Union Station, finding my place, getting my ID and information for Fiji Academy, and that's when I meet Glenn. And I think we were in between sessions at that time, so it was a quiet time, and Glenn and I were able to introduce each other to each other, and talk and get to know each other. And it was just like, wow. How could my fraternity be doing something so significant personally to me, but also so outward looking for so many other people? I was just overwhelmed. I was enthusiastically excited by all this. I met active brothers, graduate brothers, the leadership of the fraternity, including yourself, Bill, which I remember meeting you ages ago. I won't tell you how many years ago when I met you at TCU in Fort Worth, when you were in that area doing some graduate work with us. I believe you were there on a semi-regular basis. And I was just flabbergasted by the fact that here I am back with this fraternity that means so much to me, but I felt I had no contribution that I could give to it very much. And then all of a sudden, I was in the middle of the Immortal Phi Gam project, getting steeped into it, getting further and further into it, and just loving every minute that I was given to give back to my fraternity, but also give back the second chance at life to tell people about how important it is to be an organ and tissue donor, and just to find this whole circle come around, and to me, to be lucky enough to be part of it was just awesome.
And you've attended every in-person Fiji Academy since 2016.
That's right.
There's an award named after you that's given at the Fiji Academy to the chapter or two chapters that do a great job in promoting organ donation on their campuses. Now let's backtrack a little bit, because I want to reemphasize a point, or maybe fill in some information we didn't provide clearly to our listeners earlier, and that is to explain what was the condition you had that necessitated your lung transplant.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have an underlying condition that produced my lung failure, and it's called cystic fibrosis. And cystic fibrosis is a genetic disease. It's a rare, fatal disease. About 33,000, 34,000 people in the US are considered diagnosed with CF. And there's not that many in the world that really have it. It's called an orphan disease, meaning that so few people have it that, there's really a lot, for the most part, there's not as much emphasis on it because so few people are affected by it. And there's less funding and research that goes into it than maybe, other forms of disease. I was diagnosed late in life. I was 30 years old when I was diagnosed. I had no idea I had cystic fibrosis, but I had always had some health issues. And they were primarily the two ways cystic fibrosis affects you is with the pancreas and the lungs. And what they do, what your cell structure is changed. You have a difference in the way sodium goes in and out of your cells, and it causes a plaque. It causes plaque in your pancreas, which makes your pancreas and your enzymes that digest your food in your intestines, that goes bad. So basically, you're becoming inefficient in taking in nutrients in your body, and it also destroys the lungs. It causes a plaque in both areas, the lungs and the pancreas, and that plaque then causes scar tissue and kills off the lungs. And all my life, I had the pancreatic deficiency, pancreatic enzyme deficiency, and I didn't know it. I had health issues, but the doctors I had seen really hadn't identified what it was because my lungs were good. And once I hit about 40 years old, my lungs had changed, and my transplant occurred at age 46, and I'm 53 today. But it wasn't until I was 30 years old that I was diagnosed, and it wasn't until about 40 years old that my lungs started to really change.
Yes.
And it was something that cystic fibrosis is a vicious disease because there's no cure for it. However, in the last 3 to 4 years, there's been some treatments for people that don't have transplants that's helping lung functions quite a bit, and there is promise that there's treatment for it, but there's still no cure.
Yes, and you mentioned earlier that you were in the Talk chapter at TCU in the late '80s, really enjoying that experience. But then your symptoms from the undiagnosed CF got worse. That necessitated you moving closer to home and
That's
the
right.
transfer to Washington University.
Right. I kept getting sick all the time. I was having chest infections, respiratory infections, and I was always, I just couldn't keep up with everything. So I came home and saw some specialists that kind of helped me out. And I began seeing some, different doctors that were going to build my immune system up. I still was undiagnosed at that point with the CF because I transferred into WashU, completed my undergraduate studies at Washington University, and that was fine. And I stayed in St. Louis. I eventually met my wife. We got married. But prior to getting married, I had this cold and it wouldn't go away for like 6 weeks. And my wife says, you need to go see the doctor. And I said, oh, okay. Who wants to go see the doctor? And we started doing some tests, and there was more and more tests. And finally, I had a genetic blood test done at Barnes Jewish, Washington University School of Medicine. It was one of the first genetic blood tests that was available at the time. And I had that, and there it showed. I had cystic fibrosis, Delta 508 marker, and basically everything came clear about my condition. And even though while it became clearer, it became a little bit more sobering to know that this was a fatal disease, that it would more than likely take my life sooner than I'd wanted to do.
Absolutely.
And that's basically, it was a rude awakening, but it also was a good awakening to know that I needed to take care of myself in many different ways.
Yeah, absolutely. So as the recipient of a life-saving transplant, what does it mean? And a member of Phi Gamma Delta, what does it mean to you that your fraternity is devoting time and attention and effort to this cause of organ and tissue donation?
To me, it's a great blessing. It's a great honor to know that first of all that our fraternity is taking that on as an ongoing mission. The other part of it is it's humbling for me to be able to have my second chance at life and participate in real important activities such as advocacy for organ and tissue donation. I do it on so many levels. I do it every day that I talk to different people, and I feel that it's appropriate to bring it up. I mentioned I I tell the story um, about so many different. I tell stories about how this all came about, just the ones that we talked about today, uh, to reinforce that things bigger than ourselves are always occurring. I just was lucky enough to be a vessel or put myself in the pathway of allowing these things to occur. And I am so moved by the fact that Glenn Moore from Lubbock, Texas, who I'd never met or heard of, and he'd never met or heard of me, had the inspiration from watching a YouTube video on a soccer team or a football team in another part of the world, decided that they needed to participate in organ and tissue donation, the advocacy for it through the affiliation of the fans of the soccer team. And Glenn thought, hey, what a great idea. We could take that cause on and we could do it through our fraternity.
Mhm.
I'm glad he did
Mhm.
because I really believe that if we can save one life, well, through people donating organ or tissues, then we're doing our job. But I'm certain that we've done more than that. I'm certain that we've affected more people. That Phi Gamma Delta and the Immortal Phi Gamma Project has impressed upon enough people already that more than one life has been saved through this, or
Yes.
will.
Yeah.
And
Now,
to me, that's the gift that I want to give back, and give anything I can to the fraternity to continue that great work.
well, Ed, we've heard your very, very moving story. Help our listeners understand the global need and the impact. Uh,
Well,
what
at
kind of
least
need is there out there for organ donors?
in the United States, there's about 120,000 people on average that are on the waiting list. The vast majority of those are people that are waiting for um, uh, kidneys to survive. Uh, there is a new emphasis, at least in the kidney donation area, that living donors are being more and more encouraged to participate. There's been funding through Congress and laws passed that allow living donors to not have a financial setback by being a
Mm.
living donor of a kidney, which is a
Mm.
great move. The other thing is that we basically have all these opportunities around us it's very easy to become an organ and tissue donor. You can go to your DMV, register with them. You can go online with Donate Life. You can, partner up with your local OPO, organ procurement organization. We have a lot of that information for our fraternity brothers and their chapters on how to go about having um, uh, advocacy and organ and tissue donation drives on their local campuses. Some great work has been done already. And now that we're hopefully getting back to normal, uh, we'll be able to have more of those events, and people will be able to get together more often and have fun, but also do great things together again. So, you have 120,000 people that are on the waiting list. In our region, we have about 1,200 in our little sector, and if those are life-saving organs that need to be received. So when someone passes away, uh, those donations can save lives. They do save lives, and for everyone that doesn't get the call and does not get that life-saving organ, they will perish. And
Yes.
it's there's no other way about it. There is some things that can sustain your life, but without it, your body will fail. Without the heart, the kidney, the lungs, the pancreas, the intestines, without those gifts from someone that's already passed away, either by themselves wanting to be an organ donor or their family, um, you know, we haven't been able to find a way to generate organs on our own without having someone actually donate them.
When we call in Phi Gamma Delta, we call those gifts immortal gifts, right? And thus the idea of the opportunity for a brother to make himself immortal.
And
by being an organ donor.
I'm pretty sure that my donor, his name is Brandon, whose lungs are in me right now. He wasn't a fraternity brother, but it doesn't matter. You don't have to be a member of Phi Gamma Delta to be a donor. You don't have to be a member of Phi Gamma Delta to receive an organ, life-saving organ. But there's so many people that are passionate about this, but there's also so many people who think that this won't work or it can't work. But we're lucky enough to be in a great situation with the United States and our hospitals and our transplant centers. They do some great work, and
Yes.
it's very easy to become an organ donor. And as Glenn Moore puts it, this is so all through your life you're asked to make donations and give of yourself, while money, time, all kinds of different effort. And he says, but on your last day of your life, after you've passed, why not give the gift of life to somebody else when you don't need your organs anymore? You don't need your lungs, you don't need your heart, you don't need your kidneys or your pancreas anymore. Why not, give that after you don't need them to somebody that does? And it just makes perfect sense.
It makes a tremendous impact with no sacrifice.
Right.
Right. Just your humanity, just showing humanity.
Correct.
Well, Ed, thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for providing such leadership and inspiration and energy to the Immortal Phi Gam project. And I look forward to seeing you at the next Fiji Academy in St. Louis.
I do too, Bill. I've been so happy to see the podcast. You've done a great job. It's incredibly humbling to be asked to participate in something so great that the fraternity is doing in the podcast, but also with the Immortal Phi Gam project. I feel very, very blessed to give back and have this added meaning to my second chance at life.
Indeed,
indeed, wonderful opportunity.
Thank you. To our viewers and listeners, thank you for joining us for this edition of On the Banks. If you're not already signed up as an organ donor, it's very simple to do, and I hope that Ed's story has persuaded you to take those simple steps to do so. We've made it easier for you, as Ed alluded to a moment ago. You can go to the fraternity website, www.phigam.org/immortalphigam. You'll find out about the need for organ donation. You'll see a video there that Ed helped to produce called Immortal Gifts. And you'll find a link there that will help you to register on the organ donor registry maintained by the organization Donate Life. It's also important if you intend to be an organ donor, to talk with your family members about your wishes as well regarding your desire to be an organ donor. There are many, many interesting stories in Fiji land. Please join us on other podcasts. Join us again as we meet brothers and share their stories. And until next time, I'm mighty proud to be a Fiji.